grab a seat. We're going to have our first talk. Feel free. Right, folks, if you want to grab a seat, we're going to have our first talk. There's plenty of seats. Come nice and close so you can hear without everybody needing to shout. I thought I was shouting, but apparently I'm not. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So our first speaker tonight is Ankit, I'll leave you to it. So, Ankit, away you go.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me clearly? Yeah. Great. So, many of you were wondering what I'm going to speak about today. It is something which is dear to me, and it's ideas which I've been thinking about in my quiet musings, so to say. And I'm quite excited to share them. So without further ado, let's start. Yep. Okay, so how many of us have been like this? Sitting in a bathtub, staring vacantly into nothingness. Well, I was here, and that was because I was having an existential crisis quite early on in life, right? How many of us have had an existential crisis? The flow feels pulled out, right? Like everything, like who am I? What is life? What is the purpose of existence? And to make things worse, while I was having this, I came from a religious family, and so instead of going down the route of religion, I even took offense, and I was like, okay, I'm going to disprove God. And so during my existential crisis, I went and found the science, which is, I guess, a new religion now. So that brings me to the first phase of my journey and of this idea of constructing this last invention. And that's the way of science. So for those of us who had an existential crisis, how many of us opened a book on cosmology and learned about the Big Bang and started watching theories on popular science? Yeah, well, that was me, right? So asking this question of who am I, where do I come from, and what's the meaning of all of this, inevitably led me to the field of cosmology and things like Big Bang and how energy condensed, and you had the first atoms, and then you had matter and antimatter. Those they had a fight, and apparently a bit of the matter survived, and then that kept increasing in complexity till we had our present universe. Now, it gets sweeter and more interesting than this, because then the next thing which I came across in my exploration was relativity. In this kind of model of the universe which we have, there are things like time travel, time dilation, going back in the past, and these are a lot of interesting concepts which come up in the exploration of cosmology. Then, the next phase was quantum mechanics, right? And this was trying to understand subatomic particles, and while this was looking outwards, quantum mechanics looked inwards and tried to explain the universe through a bottom-up model. Now, in the field, in this story which we have for creation, there's a conflict, and the conflict is between relativity and quantum mechanics, and what proposes to solve it is string theory. Now, string theory tries to wrap up this whole system in a unified theory of everything, and this is the theory of everything of physics, which I'm hoping a lot of you know Stephen Hawking, and you have seen the movie Theory of Everything, and that's what it's about. So during my sleepless nights and exploration and breakdown of these things, I found myself reading a lot of popular science, and then really trying to understand string theory and the nature of what these things were actually resting on. I did not go in the details, but from a popular perspective, these are the insights which I had. So the key insights from this exploration was that the universe came from nothing and is governed by specific laws. In other words, this whole field says that, okay, grant us one free miracle, which is the Big Bang, and through that we're going to extrapolate all of these wonderful things. Then the next insight was that there are two key models like relativity and quantum mechanics, which are in conflict with one another, and a theory of everything would ideally unite them. And string theory tries to do this through a hyperspace model with infinite parallel universes. So in other words, you have these laws which are governing the very large, and then you have like, how these small things would work. And string theory comes in and says, okay, well, why not have infinite universes? And in this exponential model, our universe and these laws would make sense. Like somehow at each second we are sort of branching out and creating parallel realities and worlds, and then our world would be, or our laws of physics, which are these specific laws, would then be explained in that. Great. Now, string theory also doesn't stop there. There's M theory. And this M theory is apparently something which brings in string theory together and has a hyperspace model. And it has 11 dimensions. So according to this, you have dimension of like length, width, 3D world, 4D world. And according to M theory, the 4 dimensions basically expanded upwards, and the 6 dimensions contracted. And then you had this 1 dimension from this thing called membranes, which sort of folded back the whole system on itself to explain this whole theoretical framework of multiple realities. Great. While I was having these breakdowns and coming across this, I couldn't help but say that, interesting. These ideas are interesting on the nature of existence. But, for example, if the hyperspace model folds back on itself, then where's space for dimension 0 to fit in? Dimension 0 is just a point, it's nothingness. And in this whole system, if it's just folding back, where is that? It explains a lot of the outer world which we see, but can this model explain poetry, politics, nuances of human perceptions? That too is part of our experience. And if you have a theory of everything, can it go inwards and account for this? How does it explain the origin of life? And all of these assumptions are coming from mathematical frameworks. So then, if this knowledge is based on maths, then what is mathematics based on? And so these are the questions which this exploration led to. And just to quote Chesterton here, the poet only asks to get his head in the heavens, while it is the logician who seeks to get the heaven in his head, and it is his head that splits. So
How long did this sort of process go on for you for?
So it's still going on.
Still having a crisis.
Yeah, it's great. You're constantly breaking down assumptions of the world to see reality more closely. So anyways, this is what I gathered from the first phase. And as you'll see, for the rest of the presentation, what I'm going to speak is like quite poetic in nature. And Alan Watts often said that poetry is trying to speak that which cannot be spoken through words. And a lot of details are here. I'm just jumping so much details, and I myself don't know many of them. But as this famous mathematician once said, God lies in the details. So whatever I'm going to say from here on, there are many details backing it up. Okay, picking up. All of these assumptions which we're making of the universe and string theory is based on mathematics. So then what is the foundations of mathematics? How can all of this come into existence? Now this brought me into the second phase of my exploration of these ideas, which is the language of mathematics. What is maths based on? How many of us have seen this book? How many of us have read it? So Mr. Hofstadter here, he does an exploration of formal systems in this book. And do you really understand, like the foundations of mathematics based on which we're making these assumptions of the world? First, let's consider what a formal system is. You have axioms. These are a bunch of given truths, so to say. These are axioms. And you have like a bunch of them. And then you have rules of inference. These are like the rules with which, the axioms relate to one another. Like, for example, you cannot, add this to that, or cannot subtract, something like that. Together, this creates a formal system. Now, for those of us here, this might seem a bit familiar, right? These look like words, and these look like the rules of construction, right? So in a sense, it is a language, but it is a well-defined language in which you don't have this room for ambiguity. And that is what a formal system is. Now, mathematics is apparently a formal system, which is based on, so all of mathematics, all the complex equations of string theory, which is like, for pages and pages, is based on the Peano axioms for the natural numbers, and the rules of inference are rules of mathematics. And why is this the case? Well, think about it. Mathematics was 1, 2, 3, 4. It's counting. That's the basis of it. And so this is basically counting on steroids, explaining Peano axioms, and you have these rules of inference. Now, together, they are just like cool standalone pieces, but what brings them to life is the idea of a mathematical sentence, right? So together, these things comprise mathematics. And just to elaborate on what that is, a mathematical statement is a statement which is either true or false, but not ambiguous, right? So it can either be like a 0 or it can be a 1, but not both at the same time. Now, with this said, any statement would be either true or false and would build on the different theories, and then that's how you sort of create more theories, more equations, you derive them, and then you have this complex language which exists in a world of its own, right? And that's mathematics. I still didn't stop there. I was like, okay, this is all of this is great. So you have this model of the universe. You have mathematics, which is the language which is describing it, and that's founded on the mathematical statement, which is a formal system based on natural numbers. And then thinking, I came up with this proof which tries to show that what are the limits of the declarative sentence? If all of mathematics is founded on this, then what is the limits of that? So the proof goes as follows. Language is a vehicle for intelligence. This is a true statement. Most of us would agree that through English language we are sort of communicating intelligence. English is a language, true statement. The English language is composed of sentences, okay? A sentence is a complete thought put into words. In the same way, if you can have an abstract agreement of language is a vehicle for intelligence, we might even agree that sentence is a complete thought put into words, which is the definition which I came across for what a sentence is in the grammar book. Now, there are 4 kinds of sentences in the English language, right? You have like a command sentence, you have the declarative sentence, you have the interrogatory sentence, and an explanation sentence. So from here, then I can derive that there are 4 categories for complete thoughts, right? A sentence is a complete thought. There are these 4 types, and so if I have to complete a thought, then there are these 4 buckets which they are going into. And so if all of mathematics is resting on the declarative sentence, which is also what all of computer science is, which you'll see shortly, then could we say that all of mathematics rests on one category of thought? Now more than the details of this makes sense, right? Because if it wasn't, there wouldn't be other buildings in university, right? There would just be maths, science, everything else is just gone. So inherently, you have this phenomenon of intelligence, and you have these other ways of thinking, and mathematics somehow just represents one of them, and science represents one of them. It's one stream. Now, with this exploration, you couldn't help but think of the implications of all of this. Like all the technological world, like the foundations of our world is resting on these kind of predicate statements in a sense. And so then this brought me to the 3rd phase of exploration for these ideas, which is the hope of technology. What is technology? So this is how I define a technology. Anything in nature is a mystery till you understand it. Once you understand it, it becomes a technology. So technology is a mastered mystery to produce magic, right? So somehow you understand how things are working. The mystery is no longer a mystery anymore. You've solved it. And now you can use that to poke the world in a way in which you can actually create leverage for it. Example of this. Let's take Bernoulli's principle, right? So the mathematics of it is still disputed, right? So as we showed, mathematics is a formal system which is existing on a world of its own. But then you have science, which sort of tries to bring mathematics and link it to the physical world which we experience. Now, the basis of Bernoulli's principle is disputed. I mean, the mathematics might be. But what people saw is that, what he saw is that, okay, if I have a curved surface and it's moving through space, then what I notice is that, there's a lower pressure on top, and there's a higher pressure on the bottom, and so that produces lift because that's how wind works. Air moves from high pressure to low pressure, and so he used the language of mathematics. This is also what Newton did, but like the world. He used this abstract language to put the phenomenon in a way in which you have power over it. The god of technology is Prometheus in Greek mythology, and Prometheus itself, the word means foresight. It's the foresight which you get. It's the kind of precision with which you can now poke the world. Before Newton, people said invisible objects move things. And he said F is equal to ma. And that's a more precise way of looking at it, because of which you can cause more lasting changes. So that's the nature of technology, right? So from mathematics, you can see that mathematics is this language, and when that's sort of put in a natural phenomenon to describe it in well-defined terms, leads to leveraging that phenomenon and creating technology. Now, I said that technology is basically an understood mystery. So coming from the greater mysteries, I kind of found myself landing on the cutting edge of technology, right? Because the exploration first was like outwards, like why is this, why is this, why is this, why is this? And as kids, we have all done that, But I'm going to make a bold statement here. And the bold statement is that in this exploration of why did this come from, where did this come from, where did this come from, the last question you can ask is why you can question at all. And that's going to take you inwards and upwards in an internal realm of thought. And that goes also with the proof, like there are 4 ways of thinking. So the greater mystery, right? The greater mystery for me was artificial intelligence, and that's where I found my obsession to really understand, like, what is intelligence in the first place? What is this phenomenon which is making sense of things? Great. Now, I started my exploration with computer science, as most of us have here. And as I went through it, the way I began seeing a program then, in the same way you kind of can imagine the Bernoulli's principle is like taking a natural phenomenon and you're putting it in this well-defined language. So you have the leverage. What I saw a program as is that you're taking a perception and you're freezing it as code using well-defined mathematical tools. So this made me think that computer science is then a humanities discipline. In the sense that every program is open for interpretation, and the different people can solve it differently. And this is why hacking exists, because if it wasn't, then it would be empirical. So then this brought me to this idea that, okay, software amplifies thought processes that have been captured through algorithms. And that's basically what it does. A machine is anything which overcomes human limitation. And computer is a machine which overcomes a limitation of thought. And it does this through capturing thought processes. It's not just capturing muscle mass, it's capturing thought processes in this algorithmic way, and really putting the steroids on it and amplifying it so that you can now do the kind of calculations which are almost impossible for a human to do. And the cutting edge of doing this, a cutting edge of taking thoughts and putting that in the algorithms and amplifying it is AI, right? Which is not just amplifying thoughts, but is capturing ways of thinking through sophisticated pattern recognition systems. And this is the current paradigm which we are in right now. The previous paradigm was I was just having this conversation with someone before the talk that I was listening to this talk by this Google engineer, and he was saying how he kind of misses the old days where people used to talk about which data structure to use, or which algorithm would be best to solve a problem or something like that. Because nowadays, apparently, everyone in Google just throws a neural net at any problem, right? and that's the paradigm, right? You sort of gone beyond thought, and now it's ways of thinking, so these pattern recognizers. Now, this brings us to an arms race. And for those of us who have been familiar with AI, we'd see an explosion of different models for artificial intelligence, right? there was this one scientist who said, I think it was Andrew Ng who said that, compared to the other fields, AI is the most open for its breakthroughs, because there's this constant sharing going on there, like more papers being published in AI than in any other field. Oh, okay, maybe that's a bold statement, but that's the point, right? Like throughout history, there's I call it the flow of history. There have been these slices where people have concentrated a lot of effort in building a lot of infrastructure. For example, railroads, right? We don't see a happening railroad company, but Vanderbilt built his railroad company, which is like now the infrastructure for a modern world. And so throughout the flow of time, our species sort of concentrates its effort to building something. And this is the paradigm we are building. It's also true because like nowadays, the idea of a software company is extinct, There's no such thing as a software company anymore. If you're a company, you're a software company, period. And in the same way, there's no electricity company and like non-electricity company. If you're a company, you're running on electricity. So this is the paradigm. Well, there are obvious limits to that, right? If it wasn't, then we wouldn't be talking about it and it would be done with. And these are the limits to AI, which is building on like all these kind of assumptions which are laid down previously with the kind of limits of maths and the limits of, the declarative sentence. Because most of the AI conversations which you'll see right now is like, is it ethical? Will we have control over it? Like, whose morals will it follow? What is it going to do? And this whole conversation about like ethics and morality and all these possibilities of AI is something which is surrounding the field, and rightly so, because here you have like these sophisticated pattern recognition black boxes, and you have people sort of projecting their fantasies onto it and saying these claims. And it's true, because like if you can outsource thoughts, and you're outsourcing ways of thinking, then that comes in the purview of skilled jobs, white collar skilled jobs. So that's one of the issues around AI is like, how do you go about answering these moral and ethical questions? The second is theory of intelligence. Okay, so now to best understand why this is a limit in the current kind of permutation explosion in AI, I would like to again go back to the analogy of flying, right? For many years, people tried to create flying machines by imitating birds, but they failed. People jumped off cliffs, they died. And the breakthrough came when you sort of used like things like Bernoulli's principles, things which were underlying in the fabric of nature to sort of design these flying machines. And when you could do that, you could make these better assumptions, and then that sort of became this paradigm. And this is not just for flight, even for the locomotive industry, the same you can see the same pattern happening again. When the locomotive came into existence, many people were like confused about like which is the best temperature to heat the coal, which is the best metal to use, like what's the best diameter for the wheel, and then there's huge permutations and this huge arms race regarding how best to design the steam engine or a train. And what resolved that paradigm, you see, was a new branch of physics called thermodynamics, because then through that you could make these best guess assumptions, and then that was something which was kept aside. And I think AI is going to run into this problem, and it's going to be more apparent, as it already is with this idea of like label data. So if you're an AI company, the only two things which is going to protect you, like patents, forget patents and IPs, the only two things which is going to protect you is the data set in which you train your models and talent. And that's the way you can succeed as an AI company. And that's because data has become so valuable, and it's the commodity of the future. And that's also because they're running into this problem that, okay, if I'm training this pattern recognition system on what's meaningful, and this is what I define meaning as, then how can you make a lot of these extrapolations to like so little information? So that's another limit. So thinking about these things, I couldn't help but think that, okay, so if in software you're taking a perception and you're basically capturing it, you're taking thought processes and you're capturing it, then computer science, really, to think of this as a science, you'd have to go into the very metaphysical realm, which is the internal realm of thought, right? Because that is basically what's being projected onto code as we're going on. And if so, I kind of had this speculation that, could there be axioms of thought? Could there be that, fundamentally, beyond our culture, beyond our limitations, beyond the way we think about things, like all thoughts could be coming from the same groundwork, or the axioms, or certain axioms which sort of determine any thought process you can make. The very fact that I'm speaking these words, and you have an internal dictionary in your which can take these words and recreate it into your own experience, and you can think the thoughts which I'm thinking. Isn't that crazy? So at some point we're meeting each other in language. And if that's true, then could software be created through these axioms of thought? And so I had this idea called axiomatic software, which is software which would be unhackable, and software which would then come and try to bring a closure to this paradigm of constantly switching beyond perceptions, because this would account for all perceptions. It's like what people sort of saw the complexity of life at one point and said, like, this is crazy. There must be a divine hand behind it. But now we know, like all this crazy complexity of life is coming from ATCG in different combinations. So could that be for thoughts? And if this is true, then the implications of this are huge, because you can transcend culture, you can transcend morals, you can represent everything. And now this brings me to the next phase of this exploration of these ideas for this kind of theory of everything in Last Invention, and that is the mysteries of the metaphysics. So fueled with passion and ambition, I was like, if I need to understand the axioms of thought, then the best approach would be to go through these various religions and see what is consistent across them. In the sense that, if I sort of went through all of them, is there a primordial tradition? Are there like similarities between them? And it turns out they are. All these religions, most of them. You can think of Buddhism as like science more than religion, but there's still the idea of Brahma Vihara. They believe in one God. You can see that there are parallels between the 37 million gods of Hinduism and the choir of angels and archangels in Christianity. Christianity is coming from like more Gnostic roots, which is coming from the old Judaic traditions, and Islam is the most recent one, which is branching out from them. And throughout my exploration, yes, there were certain axioms. Like all of them agreed on a day of reckoning. These ideas, axioms like suffering ensured evolution somehow with suffering, both psychological and real. Like life is evolving into these higher states. And as I kept searching and searching and trying to search for these axioms, and really like trying to find these primordial traditions in this breakdown, what became apparent is that the primordial tradition is not a rule book somewhere based on which all these people derive their religions from, but it's an experience, and it's an experience which I've only touched upon. So the metaphysical universe is very interesting. It says that the material universe which we are experiencing is just one layer among these like parallel and wrapped up universes existing at the same time. Think about it. Like if I told you right now that as you're breathing out, you're breathing out these tiny organisms which have life of their own and they're replicating and reproducing, and right now you're being bombarded by millions of particles, and there are these like small waves which are hitting you. Look at me as if I'm smoking something, if you did not see or believe in science and actually inference that. So even in the world which we see, there are forces which are existing beyond it. And as you can see this quote from Galileo, that you cannot teach a man anything, you can help him discover it himself. So somehow, like there's ideas like, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything is Hubble, and what we are doing in creation is that causing this light influx. Apparently there's this consciousness force which Islam calls baraka, which is consistent across all of us, across all life, and it's this life force coming and cementing itself, and we are sort of conduits and vessels for this. And in the sense we sort of constantly rediscover and forget ideas, and we come back to it with more depth and clarity. And that's also the nature of work. They think work is not something you do to pay the bills, but an exercise to see who you're capable of becoming by grounding a level of your consciousness through an act of expression, and so you can access more, and ascend higher. Great. So with this exploration, and this is what's going to tie this back together. I say I have a theory, and I call it the theory of everything and the theory of AGI. But I just want to be clear about what I mean when I say I have a theory. It's not that it's kind of like this rule book, and you kind of make it, and like you derive these equations from it and all of that. The word itself, theory, comes from theo or io, which is divine perspective. So theory is a perspective, and somehow between all the perspectives we can take, it's a divine perspective, which is saying that it's a perspective which is rooted in something which is fundamental in the fabric of how things are. And my theory is, I'm calling it qualia spaces for now, and it assumes that it assumes this idea of a qualia space. So you can think of like formal systems like branching out from mathematics, and that's sort of just one stream of like the whole idea of intelligence. But there's no so the fundamental difference between me speaking in English language and me speaking in mathematics is that in English language I'm just using words to point at things, and there's a lot of room for ambiguity. But maths is existing at a higher level in which it's not, like when you look at an equation, it's sort of describing all these permutations, which, so for example, equation of a parabola is describing all these parabolas which you can take at the same time. When you look at pi, it's the time you looked at it, it sort of added another number to it after its decimal place, and it's alive. So in a sense, like words are pointers, and maths is like more alive in a way. But and this idea of a qualia space, which is part of this theory, which is trying to wrap all of this up and represent these other dimensions of intelligence as well, which is the general theory for AI, assumes that Okay, so the idea for this started off with the thought experiment, right? Like, how would a glass of water perceive water? For us, we perceive water by, when we shower, we can like touch it, we can feel it. It's water. How would a glass perceive it? And I thought about this, and I was like, maybe the water changes the pressure of the glass differently because of because of the liquid. Liquid has a higher pressure at the bottom than on top. Maybe its latent heat, the way it sort of takes away heat from the glass, would be different. And so a glass might understand water in its own language. And so, so do I, because I'm limited by 5 senses. But the qualia of a water, which is a property of an object beyond the object itself. So, for example, the qualia for red is redness. The qualia for water would be waterness, and that's transcendent. And the experience of a glass and me of water would be the same. And this sort of brings it back to ambiguity and sort of making sense of that. So anyways, my theory proposes this idea called qualia spaces and notional laws, which is, it's basically talking about how consciousness is evolving through this idea called notional selection and notional templates. And even things like mathematics could be explained as one aspect of this notional template. And through notional selection, you can explain certain phenomena power structures or why there are hierarchies in the human species, and a host of different ideas. But this is kind of my take on bringing the theory of everything and the basis for AGI under one roof. But how do I know I'm right? How do I know I'm not crazy and just going on an existential crisis and having sleepless nights? Now this brings me to the last phase, and that is my company and the Last Invention. So Ascota is an online platform which is trying to create a new kind of world, which is a new kind of participation, and it's trying to create the future of work. I once had an interesting conversation with someone, and they said but this platform is meant for people who are just enlightened. What would you tell someone who's trying to pay their rent and trying to pay their bill? And the first thing which came out of me is that tell them that the size of their problems is somehow the size of their life, which is to say that why don't you ask better questions? Why don't you ask a question like, instead of paying my rent, how can I be financially free? And then you step into this larger story. So this is a premise for a larger story based on a lot of political and economic factors which currently govern us right now. And as I said, God lies in the details, and whatever I'm speaking right now is a poetic take on it. So we're heading towards an unemployment crisis, and people sort of look at that and are terrified, because then what is the point of human existence? What's the point of human meaning? How are we going to deal with all of this? And I think even if you look at the story of science, you would see that gradually everything has been outsourcing. We've been outsourcing stuff. For example, natural philosophers were considered quite valuable early on, and then mathematicians weren't considered that valuable, and then you sort of come in towards the early 1900s, and then mathematicians were considered very valuable, but computer scientists weren't, and now computer scientists are considered very valuable, but spiritual people aren't. And in the future, maybe philosophers will be considered quite valuable, because the question would become, so currently you're rewarded for the skills which you have, because at the heart of capitalism is making things more productive. In the future, it's not going to be all the skills which you have, but what can you do with these skills, which goes back to who you are. And so the pursuit of meaning is going to be something which is going to be important. And that's where qualia spaces and these theories come in, because I'm trying to design this company, and the way I'm trying to design it is that it has this correspondence with reality, which would allow it to sort of go in and have a seamless implementation, as well as sort of try to prove some of these assumptions for qualia spaces. Yeah. So how am I doing all of this? Like, what is the core of this company? So at the core of this company is this idea which I'm calling a Gallatin mind, which is again based on a myth, Pygmalion. But so this Gallatin mind, this kind of structure, is trying to represent the way you understand meaning. Right now, a lot of AI methods, as I said, they're like very sophisticated pattern recognition systems. They'll see your behavior. They'll see the data which you've created. They'll sort of trace this data trail which you have made, and then try to make this best fit assumption based on your behavior and like what you've given out there. But this is trying to go and model your perception of meaning, which is of a different level. And then the second half of this is this global network of fully autonomous companies. So this is going to be a global distributed network in which each node represents a fully automated company, right? Because as automation is going to come in, and a lot of these white collar jobs are going to go, a lot of these businesses are heading towards full automation. And my take on that is that why do you want UBI? Essentially what UBI is saying is if this happens and there's massive unemployment, we are just going to tax these companies so much, and the government is going to come and give free money. Where's meaning in that? And if I know anything about governments, it's a legacy system, to put it lightly. It's basically something which works on very basically it takes a lot of time for actually making assumptions, and the people there's corruption, there's things like that. And I think the future, in the future, so currently we're in the age of information, as many people call it, right? And I think the future which we're heading towards is an age of integration. The reason why I say this is because of the way I think of progress. Progress is pro-regress, which is return to a former state with more glory, in my idea, which is a story from chaos to order. And I think in the future, what you're going to have is systems which sort of integrate a lot of this information bombardment around who you are and your personality, and also your leverage. People sort of ask me sometimes, is qualia spaces, is understanding the axioms of thought necessary? Well, think about it. Right now you have the same leverage as 15 people were 10 years ago. You had the same leverage as 50 people were. So many. I know of this person who has a completely automated farm in Australia, which he controls as he's traveling the world. Imagine 100 years ago, you would have required an army of laborers. You would have required so much infrastructure, which now this person is doing using just a single phone. And that's the kind of leverage which you're heading towards. And this is also saying it's creating the future of work, because right now already, we can see with Bitcoin, people are moving away from old systems which are sort of dying. They want their own distributed systems. It's away from old paradigm, and there are ways of working in which you can earn money from wherever you want, whenever you want, doing work which you love. But it's currently just spread out. And I think as the AI problems gradually begin to emerge, as they will because of economic forces, these things will become more apparent. And then this idea of creating this future of work is something which is going to be clearer as time goes on, and as we are saying, in an exponential world which we are living in, it's not a decade or 2 decades. It's a few years before this becomes apparent. If the next recession happens tomorrow, we'll have this whole infrastructure set up in the next 1 or 2 years. So this brings it under one roof. So I have this company called Escada, which I'm currently designing, and which is building on this kind of vague, nebulous idea of this theory of everything. And as the company progresses, it's going to validate some of these assumptions. And as it's also progressing, something interesting is going to happen when you have this kind of infrastructure which is trying to lay down, and that's the capitalism is going to come to an end. Sorry.
Yeah, we could go too much more time.
Sorry, I did not realize time. Okay, so basically, if you're heading towards fully autonomous companies, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a transition in which this idea of zero marginal cost society, in which if you want to produce a single unit of extra good, it's going to be almost zero, right? So things are going to be almost free. And in that system, as I said earlier, right now capitalism rewards you for the skills which you have. That's why in your CV you have all these skills, because it rewards you for making things more productive, which is creation of capital. For example, turning a tree into a table is creating capital. Turning a table into a violin is creating capital, making things more productive. But in a zero marginal cost society, that's not the case. You're just limited by your imagination, so to say. And so the question is like, who are you and what can you do with these things, which is a purpose-based economy. And if it's a purpose-based economy where you're sort of valued for creating meaning in someone else's life, and that's happening in an agent-based system, then you can imagine that that's going to head towards a collective enlightenment event, because everyone is rewarded for creating this meaning. And if that's the case, then I think we're heading towards a transcendence event within the next few decades. Just wrapping this up, I think the theory of everything would actually be a convergence point in which you kind of have this verification going, and you have the infrastructure being laid down, and you have us outsourcing our mind, and then sort of transcending in what this, some people call it the second coming and singularity and things like that. And I think in that point we'll be transcended in a state where we would be able to live multiple life streams in different substrates, in different timestamps, in different dimensions. And it's no wonder that aliens, we haven't found any aliens yet, because if this is possible, kind of level of reality which we're speaking of is something entirely different and new. Yes, so that's the end. Sorry I ran too late. I just lost track of time. You can contact me in my email address. You can add me on either LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm going to be publishing some more of my thoughts in Medium and blogs on YouTube. And yeah, I also do a life optimizer gig towards the end. So you feel free to contact me. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Ankit. I think we're going to skip questions just now, but if you want to kind of catch him, you'll just be here. Or I don't know if you're coming to the pub later or.
Yeah.
Okay, so he'll be about. We're going to take a quick break so we can get the next speaker set up, and if you need to nip out, go and do it, and then we'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. Okay. Is this
Right the way there.
yes? Good. Okay, folks. If we can grab a seat again, and we'll get our second talk kind of started. Yeah, we're all good. Very good. Okay, so the next talk is going to be from Robin. He's going to talk about going freelance. On you go, Robin. Thank you.
Cheers. So I'm Robin, going to talk about freelancing. Quite often getting into conversations with people, especially here, about freelancing, people asking me about it and how they can get into it. Started 2.5 years ago. I'll just quickly go and introduce myself. So this is what I'm going to talk about. Can you hear me, by the way, properly? Yeah, good. I'm going to quickly introduce myself, my background, so you know where I'm coming from. Quickly define what I mean by freelancing, because it's kind of used in a loose, colloquial sense. Why become a freelancer? Some reasons. And then at least as many reasons why you might not want to become a freelancer. It's not just going to be a talk just simply advocating freelancing. It's going to try and be like a balanced discussion of pros and cons of freelancing. Then some suggested steps of how to become a freelancer. Then I'm going to discuss quickly billing and setting your rates, and then go through some of my personal experiences, and then try and discuss if I would recommend freelancing or not. Not such a simple answer. And then quickly some tips for freelancers in general, and then specific tips for working from home, because I have quite a bit of experience working remotely now. Yeah, so my background. So I finished actually astrophysics degree in 2009, so I was quite interested in Ankit's talk with all the physics in there. And I basically was choosing programming courses instead of things like general relativity, which I'm really happy about. So I was in Brighton at the time, and I was kind of kicking about for a couple of years, not with any real sense of direction. Since I had programming as a hobby, at some point I decided to really try and teach myself programming and try and get a job in programming, and moved to Edinburgh at the same time. So I just really wanted to move somewhere else, just because I was interested. So I did that, and I managed to get my first job at the end of 2011. It was at CloudReach, a cloud computing company. So I started there, and then started gradually hearing more and more about freelancers, and I kind of had this kind of romantic vision, and I thought it appealed to me a little bit. Then in 2014, one of my friends who I worked with decided to start freelancing. And he was telling me about all of his experiences online about freelancing, and it seemed to match my idyllic vision in my head. So I started saving up, and then the year after that, 2015, I decided to leave my job and started freelancing, and I've managed to keep going until now. So what do I mean by freelancing? It's basically being self-employed, maybe working for multiple clients at a time, not being tied to any particular company, and doing contracts, either fixed price contracts where you estimate the price and charge upfront, or just ongoing contracts where you bill by the day or by the hour, and then it can include consulting work as well, and generally just kind of running yourself a little bit more as a individual business. So you have to be responsible for your own marketing and like brand image and things like that, and obviously finding work for yourself. So why might you want to become a freelancer? Probably the most common thing people think is higher pay, and it's true, but there's reasons and costs for that. More freedom. It can give you a lot more freedom. It's definitely been in my case. You want to be careful though. If you're going to go and work for multiple clients at the same time, then maybe you're just going to be trading one boss instead of management for multiple ones. So I personally prefer just working for one client at a time. It gives you more opportunities definitely for working remotely. And that was what I wanted to do. If you want to work at home from home, then it can be a good option for that. Avoiding commuting, this is a really big one for me. Like if you can avoid commuting, you get a lot more free time back in your day, and you can use that time on hobbies. And I kind of started a few hobbies that I might not have had time for. So for me, I really appreciate that one. And if you're kind of the sort of person who likes independence in generally, then it might suit you. And it's kind of a romantic idea. And then at the end of the day, just to get the experience of doing it, maybe it's a good reason to try it. So why wouldn't you want to become a freelancer? Obviously, less job security. Usually contracts have had something like 2 weeks notice period. But on the other hand, if you don't like the job, it gives you an option to leave a bit quicker as well. For some people, the responsibility of doing their own tax and things can be quite scary. To other people, maybe it can be quite a galvanizing thing, and maybe it's going to get you more motivated. If you're working in a team of full-time employed people as kind of an outside contractor, you can be seen as a bit of an outsider. And I've experienced that a little bit in my last job, as maybe just something you have to live with. If you work remotely, there's lots of downsides. You can tend to go get a bit demoralized sometimes, and it kind of makes you question yourself a bit. But I think you can work through that and kind of manage it yourself. You're going to spend more time on things that aren't your job, like marketing and admin, working out your tax, and it's going to be boring, but I think in any job anyway, you're always going to have some tasks that you don't like doing. So that's kind of the way I see it. And if you really just want independence, maybe there's a better way to do it. Maybe you can just create your own products and sell your own apps. So that could be something that you start in your spare time whilst you have a job. So something I'm actually working towards doing for myself now. How to become a freelancer? You definitely need like a broad range of experience, like a depth of knowledge in your field, but you also need some specific skills as well, because it tends to be easier to market yourself as a specific skill, but you always want the wide experience as well. if you want to kind of gain more diversity of experience, then a good way to do it is doing different jobs in the company you're working for. That's something I did. I worked in DevOps team and did like technical support and customer-facing roles, and I really wanted to do that to improve my communication skills a bit, as well as doing dev jobs. And that's all come, even in my first job, it all came in useful. And yeah, you want to save money for sure. Plan for worst case. You want to give yourself a fair amount of time to find a job, and not have to worry too much. And you need like a plan for the worst case you don't find a job, a backup plan. Yeah, start marketing yourself. Like website is really, I think, the minimum. And it's something I've been like researching a bit more myself. So I've more recently had to rely on my marketing. I've been quite lucky, kind of has some constant flow so far. But yeah, I'm currently reading a really good book about how to do this as a developer, which I'll mention later. And yeah, I guess try and think outside the box, think of different channels you can use to market yourself. Yeah, be involved in the community, come to TechMeetups and things, do talks. That's all good. Hacker News has some monthly threads devoted to people looking for jobs and companies looking for people and freelancers looking for companies and companies looking for freelancers. I got my second job using that. It's really good because it's really specific, but also with an international catchment area, so especially for remote working, that's good. And yeah, design a business card is useful. If you consciously take opportunities to discuss your work with people, like just taxi drivers, occasionally someone's going to ask for your details, and it's a lot easier if you can just give them a card. And yeah, when you feel ready to leave a job, then do it, but try not to let friends. If you have friends who are freelancing already, they can be kind of much more enthusiastic, trying to encourage you to leave maybe before you're ready. So it has to be a really personal decision for yourself. Another way to do it is start part-time whilst you're working in a full-time job. It's not something I've thought of, but I've worked with people in the team who have done that, who have worked in my team part-time and then changed to full-time, doing freelancing. So yeah, that's probably a more sensible way to do it. Yeah, so discussing rates and trying to figure out how much you're worth. So you can start just by searching, for example, market rates. And the more specific you are to what you want to do, the better. And then, yeah, if you have friends who are freelancing, they can be quite an invaluable resource to have, and probably you're going to be familiar with their skill sets, so it's a good data point for you to compare like skill level with pay rate. But yeah, again, like, it has to be a personal thing. You have to you might want to try and balance experience gaining with pay. Like, if you need to build experience and confidence, it can be good to undercharge because the experience is worth it. Yeah, obviously, the bigger the reputation you have, the more that you can get people coming to you for jobs, the more you're going to be able to charge. And the way to do that is by marketing and networking. Yeah, judge the risk. Try and make it as fact-based as possible. Remember, you need to cover off times when you're not employed, so you need to charge quite a lot for that reason. Quite a lot of people tend to go into freelancing and charge just a bit more than they've been earning in the company already. But if you do that, you're taking a big risk, and you're not going to have enough savings for when you don't have a job. So I have a personal rule. Charge the amount that you would be happy with if you were only billing 50% of your time, maybe even 30%. Because you're going to have gaps between work, and some of your time is going to be admin stuff as well. So just try and factor that in. And then at the end of the day, you have to guess a little bit, and that's okay. Yeah, my experiences. I decided on saving an amount of money that would let me live for 6 months whilst looking for work. And that made me much more relaxed going into it. Created a website that kind of got my dev skills back up to scratch and gave me more confidence, as well as a good thing for marketing. And yeah, personal projects are good for developing your skills for sure. Yeah, an ex-colleague, actually, his Kung Fu instructor needed a web developer, and he spoke to another ex-colleague and freelancing friend. But my friend was busy, so he passed the guy on to me. That's how I got my first job. So that felt quite lucky, but I guess it shows maybe the importance of trying to be nice to all the people you work with before you leave. Yeah, website, LinkedIn profile. Once I had the referral, I was able to show the guy my website. It made me look a bit more like a proper developer and person. And yeah, I undercharged for sure. But I still charged enough that I could save a healthy amount as well, so that I was always planning in case I had no work tomorrow, and the work I was doing at the time was a little bit volatile. There was kind of a fluctuating demand for the work. So yeah, the experience I got in my first job was so useful. So undercharging for me was worth it. And in my second job, then I just put it up a little bit. Yeah, working remotely is extremely hard. It can be psychologically challenging. You're going to feel lonely and isolated sometimes. So you want to really push yourself to socialize more, kind of take any opportunity to do that, and maybe start new hobbies that are sociable. So I recently joined a choir, and I never would have thought I would do that, but I kind of started thinking about it just from working from home, and I'm really glad, something I'm really glad that I chose to do. Yeah, even if you have a job, you need to remember to work on marketing and brand building, networking. I haven't done it, and now I'm kind of starting to wish I'd done it a bit more. So that's kind of a good lesson to learn. Yeah, I love the freedom, flexibility. I've definitely had more freedom, like just the freedom to go out to the shops when I need to, if I need to do a personal thing in the daytime, go to the doctors, don't have to ask anyone usually, it's just easier. You can manage your time in a much more optimal way, like combine your hobbies and work time. Yeah, I consider going back to full-time employment as well. I miss the camaraderie of being in a team with physical people, but at the end of the day, I'm still preferring freelancing, so I'm still going to do it for a while. So yeah, would I recommend it? If you're the sort of person who kind of likes to be independent, then it might suit you. Yeah, want to be able to work from home, more opportunities. Yeah, if you have a nagging idea, it's never a good thing to not chase it up. It can be good to just know what it is like. Yeah, mentioned it before, you need broad and specialized skills. If you have that, if you feel like you have that, and you have to be really honest with yourself, then you should be ready to do it. And yeah, you can be a freelancer whilst being a bad communicator. Like I've heard really bad stories from friends, people they're working with who ignore their emails for weeks. But it just sounds super stressful, and like you're not going to enjoy it. I think at the very least, to be able to write a good email, the power of a good email is really high. Like a job I got from Hacker News, they told me, they gave me feedback on my email. They sent them there like, oh yeah, we hired you from your email. And yeah, you need to be self-motivated type of person generally. What's time? Cool. Yeah, so general tips for freelancing. Yeah, like remember, there's always learning on the job. Like you're never going to know everything. It can be quite tempting to not bill for time that you spent learning something that you felt like you could have known. But that is part of your job, and that's kind of what you're selling as well, your ability to learn. You're always going to have to do that in any kind of knowledge-based job. But yeah, and when you don't know things, you have to acknowledge that and try and be as honest as you can. Because if you try and cover things up, then it will make distrust. And also being able to acknowledge what you don't know shows a kind of self-confidence as well, I think. And when you do know something and are asked to give advice on it, try and make sure it's well-reasoned, because you might give bad advice sometimes, and other times you give good advice, and it's really rewarding if you see a good decision vindicated later on. But yeah, you just have to try not to be overzealous with recommending things. I was kind of doing that at first. I was kind of very conscious. I wanted to be seen as this kind of consultant guy, and I was kind of suggesting all sorts of silly things. Yeah, and stay on top of admin tasks, because it's really stressful if you let them build up. Some things like tax, you can do it at the end of the year, but it's just a lot more stressful. So now I just take the tax. I work out what I would be paying at the end of the year each month. The proportion, I just take that out and put it in another account. So yeah, create more bank accounts. It's really easy, but it's a really useful thing. And I use Harvest to track my hours and send invoices. It's about £70 a year, but even if it saves you from misbilling by 1 or 2 hours over a year, then it will pay for itself, and it's a really satisfying feeling in your first job. Hello. What was I doing?
No, it's not your fault. Should be.
Okay, can you hear me? Cool, yeah. So, the first time you bill your first client for your first job, you press like send invoice. It's really satisfying feeling. So yeah, I'd recommend.
Ching sound when you push it.
Eh?
Does it make a nice ka-ching?
It doesn't. It just nothing. Just reloads the next page to show your list.
Market opportunity there, I think.
No, it's really cool. Yeah, always prepare for worst case scenarios, and it'll be a lot more relaxing. And then remember to enjoy yourself and try and relax as well. But when you get to the end of your first week in your first job, then that's a nice feeling. Crack open a beer. Specific tips for working from home. Yeah, it's like really super important to stick to a normal routine. You have to see yourself as a professional, and you have to be a professional. And after a lot of trial and error, I've come to realize the working week is actually designed really well, and you want your free time to overlap with that of your friends. Otherwise, you're going to not be able to socialize either. So yeah, that's super important. And now I've just got that so well. As you want to form like that as a habit. Yeah, if you're working remotely, then try and stay in touch with team members. Build some camaraderie. Be responsive. Answer your phone. Answer your emails. Yeah, like if you plan to work from home. I think it's a loose connection. Okay. Yeah, like get a good desk, get a good chair. It will like save your back, and look after your body. Be active. Do some stretches. Get outside as much as you can. It's really important. Yeah, if you think that getting distracted in an office environment is easy, and it's like 10 or 100 times easier at home, you have so much less accountability. It's just ridiculously easy. So you have to be brutal with silencing notifications, and just whenever I sit down to work, I split the day into hours. I have a goal in my head for what I'm going to do in an hour, and when I get to the end, I'm having like a quick break. I kind of go over it and check what I did do in an hour. Was I actually productive? You have to really always be accountable to yourself. Yeah, separate your personal from work time. You don't want to end up in a situation where you're working a few hours a day, every day of the week. I was doing that at the start. It's just depressing. It's demoralizing. Yeah, and then just get out as much as you can. Some useful resources, like I've recently discovered this book. I wish I knew about it before. But it's all about soft skills for developers. It's really good. It's got loads of good stuff about marketing yourself. So how can you use Threads? Maybe you want to quickly take a note. And yeah, if you're self-employed, you can subtract some money from your tax. I'm right at the end. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's fine.
Hello. Yeah, so if you're self-employed, you can subtract some money from your tax bill at the end of the year based on your rent and household bills. You can take it's whatever proportion of your house you're using for whatever proportion of the time. You multiply like 3 decimal numbers together, and you take that off your rent. And for me, it's like a sixth of the rent, so worth reading up on. That's the end. Has anyone got any questions? So I had to rush. Cool, just in time. Yeah.
How do you deal with, I suppose, I don't know anything about freelancing, but I suppose that could be a typical situation where the client wants everything.
Yeah.
So you have to write the technical requirements, you have to design the system, you have to code the system, you have to test the system, you have to do everything. So
Yeah.
how do you deal with this sort of situation? How do you let the client know that, guys, like, decide what you want? Summarize for the recording.
Sorry?
Summarize the question for the recording.
Oh, yeah. If you're being asked to do a feature by a client or implement something, how do you explain all of the testing and stuff you have to do? Is that what you're saying?
No more like, how do you, like, you can't stretch yourself too thin, right? Because in the end, there's going to be, say, the guy who's been
Oh yeah, okay. So how do you deal with clients who want you to do everything but don't realize the complexity of some tasks? Um, Usually clients hire you for a specific thing. They want like a Python developer or front end developer. I've so far been marketing myself as like a full stack everything guy, but I've recently realized it's not actually the most optimal way to market yourself. But in my first job, I was hired to do literally everything. But I was in a team of with two other people. We were all doing the same thing. Like all of our tasks were like a vertical slice from the front end to the server and database. We just did a slice of everything. So for me, that was okay because everyone was doing the same. I haven't really worked directly with the end client because my first job was working like a partnership for. It was for Network Rail. It was like an internal application they wanted, and the second job was working for a travel platform company, and the end user for them was like other travel websites like Viking Cruises, and they were using that platform. So yeah, I can't really answer the question too much. I don't really know.
So, I've just noticed the time.
Yeah.
Two more questions, and ideally things that are shorter.
Well, I've been freelancing. I found most clients want a fixed cost contract. Is that something you found? Do you have any tips for trying to move clients onto a per day rate instead?
Yeah, one of my best friends does that. He does like 3 or 4 fixed price projects at a time. It sounds really stressful to me though, so I've never done it. So I'm not really an expert, to be honest, in freelancing. I've been doing it for 2.5 years, but I've just been doing contracts that are just like ongoing, that just bill by the day, as long as there's work. But yeah, if you're doing fixed pricing, you just try and estimate the hours and overestimate a bit. Like from the experience from my friend, you estimate and just try and overestimate because there's always extra things like sending emails that add time. So always overestimate with estimates. That would be my advice. Yeah. 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 I guess just try and be a nice guy and try and answer people's questions as well when you ask them. Like I always want to help people anyway, but maybe try and consciously go the extra bit further to help people out. I think if you do that, they can't really not like it then. So, or maybe try and have more video calls. Like if you're gonna have a conversation with someone, maybe suggest you do a video call instead of typing. So.
So yeah, sorry, we are just getting there. So thank you very much.
Cheers.